So I'm Dr. Edward Marchewka. I'm going to talk about presenting risk to the environment. And as this says, your risk presentation format doesn't matter, which usually gets, so we're going to do a check. How much range do I have?
You have from there to there.
Oh, okay, good. I like to move. Cool. I'm going to hold my coffee because I do martial arts, and last night we were doing some grappling work, and one of the defenses is a knife hand to the neck, and I couldn't talk or swallow last night. So my wife was like, "You'll be better in 5 days." I'm like, "Yeah, but I have to present tomorrow." So that's always fun. Quick legal, this is my presentation. No one else's, not a lawyer, just a doctor, but not that kind of doctor. Okay. And then, so I put in some relevant quotes on this because it's interesting how this type of topic continues to come about. So Bruce said, if you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems, and you don't understand the technology. And I think that's so relevant to this whole thing because it's not the tool that you use, it's the story. That's kind of the conclusion to this whole thing. I did write a long paper about what we're talking about today, but I'm going to give you the funner version because reading my dissertation is not fun. Dr. Nicholas Pierce, he's a researcher up at Northwestern, said exclusion is not always intentional. Inclusion is. And this speaks to one of the topics we're going to talk about, which is information asymmetry. It's if we leave people out, it's our fault. And then Barack Obama, 7 years ago. We only have to think about real-life examples to imagine what a set of systemic cyber attacks might do. This is also a matter of public safety. So cyber is a real thing. President Obama recognized it. All right, so this talk is boring one person. I'm kidding. I'm going to go through the research process that I did on this. So I did my dissertation on cybersecurity risk communication. This is basically that. At the end of it, there will be a link if you really want to read the whole thing. I went to Cal Southern. But the reason that I'm presenting, so let's see, there's that throat. That I'm presenting it here and this way is because so many of us need to understand why. When adults learn something, with the theory of education, adult education, andragogy, was that adults need to know why, they need to make it relevant. So that's what I'm going to try and do with you guys today as we go through this process. So why would I want to research this? Well, because we need to be able to tell our boards, our executives, what it is that we do. Who has to report risk, security to someone? Yep, all boards, yeah, okay. I'm just trying to get a taste. Like some people don't because they're analysts and they're here just for tech stuff. This is not a tech talk. This is a risk and communication talk. So if you want code, this is not it. I don't have code. I have stats later because that's fun. So if you understand like Pearson's coefficient and Spearman and normality statistics, there you go. So you're on it. It's been a minute. It's brought you back. There we go. No. All right. So how did I come about this, though? So when I was the head for security or not security, cyber information security, I never wanted physical security at CPS. That's a nightmare. My boss asked me, who cares about information security? I'm like, well, of course you do, and the CIO. And he's like, yeah, anyone else? No. So we had to find a way to convince them or talk to them about what it is we're doing so we could get funding. And we needed a way to map it back to the business. So I spent literally a year going to conferences, talking to peers, trying to figure out how people were measuring their environment, how they were communicating it. And the best I could get, someone would get on stage and they'd be like, we're going to do a metrics talk. And they're like, all right, you should have metrics. And like they would do that like 15 times over the next 45 minutes. They wouldn't tell me how they were doing it or what they were doing it, how are they conveying it. It just didn't work. So I developed a process by which we mapped our tactical things to an aggregated set to be able to relay that back to the business. And so it started off with like, we're just going to map to the general CIA triad and confidentiality score, an integrity score, and an availability score, because to the schools, confidentiality meant a FERPA violation, which would have put at risk $3 billion of federal funding. They paid attention as soon as we reported that out. When I reported out firewalls and all the technical stuff and everything else that we do, they're like, cool, thanks. And then they was just like, move on. And no one cared. But as soon as I said, your federal funding's at risk, they were like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, well, while they've never done it since the implementation of FERPA from the 70s, they could do oversight. Like anytime anyone gets FTC oversight, it's not like there's a fine, but then there's 20 years of reporting, and that's just expensive and annoying, and no one wanted to deal with that. And then we had integrity, which was the other part of our funding, because we had to report back to the state. And I'm like, what happens every time our reports are wrong? And the state's like, hey, you owe us money. And they're like, yeah, we got to write that check, and we got to send money back to the state. So and then the last piece was availability. Like when we did an equipment audit, and we found 50,000 assets. A lot of them were iPads in shrink wrap in closets. Well, why are these in the closets? Well, because we don't want them stolen. But they're not being used either way. So we either use them or we're going to give them to another school. Oh, no, we use them. They were then stolen. No? Y'all tough. Okay, everyone take a drink of coffee. That was funny. All right. I thought it was. All right. So risk. Why do we have to talk about risk and communicate it in risk? So there's actually some legal precedences. The first is the Caremark standard, which is a decision out of Delaware in '96. It created the threshold that said boards need to know about risk in your environment, and it's a blanket all risk. They need to be aware of those, and so cases get marked against that standard of, was the board aware of the risks in their environment? And so cyber falls into that camp. The next precedent case was 10 years later when it was Stone v. Ritter in 2006. And what happened in Stone was there was a financial fraud situation where a bunch of money was stolen, and this bank ended up getting fined $50 million. And so the board brought suit, or the shareholders brought suit against the board, and they said, you did not act in your fiduciary responsibility, blah, 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 against the Caremark standard, and the judge let it go through. A lot of times it gets killed because it doesn't meet the Caremark standard. And throughout the case, they went back and forth, did their whole thing, and the defense actually prevailed. And what the judge ruled was that while the measures or whatever was in place, the processes, was not substantial enough to prevent the fraud, the board was, one, aware, and two, had acted upon the risks as they were presented. And so the new standard was, is the board aware, Caremark and Stone, are they doing anything about it? And that some of that's the reason why boards don't want to hear from us. Well, if I hear about it, I got to do something about it. And that's the same argument for third-party risk. That's like if you have 300 questions, you're asking too many questions on your risk assessment, because if you know about it, you have to do something about it, because now you have legal risk. Again, not a lawyer. But this is what the research has found. The research has found that you got to do these things. This was in 2012, I believe, there was another case, and it was Bluebell Creamery, the ice cream maker. Again, so what they had was a listeria outbreak in their manufacturing, and several people died due to this listeria outbreak, 4 people. And so what happened was suit was brought against the board of directors. They checked Caremark, they checked Stone, and it proceeded, and the plaintiffs prevailed. And what the judge in the ruling was, it was, Bluebell, you make one thing. You make ice cream. It's not like you make 1,000 lines of product and ice cream just fell away. He was like, you make one thing, and you didn't know about foodborne illness as part of your regular reporting. Therefore, you didn't do anything to monitor it, to prevent it, to be aware, yes, you're at fault and liable for this situation. Think about your own situations and your own companies with respect to cyber. If you have a ton of data and a ton of information and very important stuff, patient safety in healthcare, how's that going to go? You know, if you're the hospital CEO, yes, Your Honor, I was not aware of the cyber risk. Really? Really? In this day and age, that's just irresponsible. So we have to be getting in front, and if banging the drum is not enough, try the legal approach, make a friend with general counsel. Many lawyers are not aware of Caremark and Stone, when I wrote the public interest organization chapter for the ABA, the Bar Association Cybersecurity Handbook, I was talking to the editor, who's a lawyer and a friend, and she didn't know about Caremark and Stone. She's like, I just learned something. So those are your standards. Have your general counsel look those up and advocate for you. So that's why we talk about risk. Let's move to the next piece here. So why is it so hard, though, and where's the problem? So a lot of us present things somewhat technically. Again, your presentation doesn't matter. We'll see why. I actually have the research to prove it. But it's because of something called information asymmetry. And a lot of the research is around the financial industry, but information asymmetry lives everywhere in our society, in our organization. In fact, it lives right here in this room. I know more about my research than you do. By the end of this, I will hopefully tell a better story so that you know more about my research than you did at the beginning. But there's good information asymmetry. Like, you go to the doctor and you're like, Doc, my throat hurts because I got jammed with a forearm into it. Help me figure out what's wrong. Like, I just know it hurts here. And he's like, well, let's take some images. Let's look at it. Let's do those things, because the doctor knows more about the anatomy and what could be wrong. And it's like, oh man, there's some vasculature in there, and we could, you need to take care of that. Doc knows more. Same thing with lawyers, right? You go to a lawyer and be like, Doc, I'm being sued. Or, lawyer, I'm being sued. What can we do about it? The lawyer can bring some options, and you want them to know more. Bad information asymmetry, we see this all, when's the last time you bought a car? Right? Anyone buy a car recently? In the pandemic? Yeah? How fun was that? Yeah, absolutely hard. Because not only did all the prices go up, you don't know how bad it went up, and then the inventory piece of it. They know so much more, right? They got to go back to the manager 45 minutes later because they're sitting there drinking coffee and doing a couple of hands of poker. Like, how hard does it be like, hey, the dude only wants to pay 40 grand. Well, let's make him sit for a while and see if we can get 42. 12 hours later, you get him down to the 40. That's bad information asymmetry. On the way in, I was listening to This American Life because I couldn't listen to the radio anymore. And so it was a safecracker who had to break into Prince's vault after he died, which I thought was incredibly fascinating that they had to bring this guy in because Prince apparently built a bank-level vault in his basement in his house. Does anyone know about this? Apparently this is somewhat common knowledge. Because they're like, oh, if you know, he does open the safe. Because like that's how they opened it. I'm like, oh, that wouldn't be much of a story. Like, oh, we get to the end and he couldn't crack it. But the amount of knowledge that this guy had about safes was just amazing. They talked about how safes get hardened with stainless steel, and then there's these plates that they put behind it, and then there's concrete, and then what they started doing was putting ball bearings in safes because it'll just spin the drill bit and crack it. But they also talked about this mousetrap lever that if you overheat it, overly jar it, this metal bar just shoots across, and even if you know the combo, you can't open it. There's like some magic key that you have to get. Well, the guy goes, this particular model, I know Prince had it because his friend posted a picture 10 years ago of this safe. So I knew the safe that Prince had. And there's about a pea-sized area on this 6x4 vault door that you can drill and not trigger this mousetrap thing. And so he does all his measurements and gets in there. Again, information asymmetry. This guy knows so much more about what he needs to do. And he drills through it, and he's able to get an endoscope in there, see the tumblers, and crack this safe. Ended up finding a 20 by 40 foot room full of Prince's recordings that had never been released. All tapes with an old computer to manage the database that had everything with like, enter this command, press enter. Enter this command, enter twice. Then press F10 to get to your various menus. I'm thinking like old green screen. But it was pretty wild. And I was like, wow, what a perfect timing for my talk today, and a great example. Now, when the board, information asymmetry actually needs to exist for them to function. If they know everything about the day-to-day, they're not serving as a board. The board's job is to review and determine if the decisions by management are appropriate for the organization. If they know everything operationally that's going on, they're way too deep. But they also need to be fed information. We need to push them. They are not necessarily going to pull. Does anyone have a board that pulls information actively? Nope. We have to feed it to them in the language that they want, in the format that they receive it. A lot of articles and postings that I see is that the only way to talk to the board is what? Anyone? Come on. What's the language of the business? Language of business. Money. It's always an argument of money. And research shows that that's actually not true. That is true for many organizations, and a large focus of research is on finance in this space. So the language of business is money in the finance world. I work for Gift of Hope Organ and Tissue Donor Network. While everything can be traced back to money, I have much greater impact if I talk about donors. The impact to the number of people donating organs, the impact of the number of organs we can recover. If we make these investments, we stay up, therefore we don't lose donors. If my phones don't ring for an hour, I lose donors. Therefore, I speak in terms of donors. That's the business. And the reason behind that is half my board are docs and transplant docs. As soon as I start talking money, they're like, we got $50 million in the bank. Why are you telling me that we've got this $1 million risk? Well, it's a risk to 10 donors. You need to fix that. Because if we lose a donor that's up to 7 organs, on average 3, which means 3 people on the waiting list died. They don't care about the cost. And docs, same thing. When we raised our kidney prices from like 30 to 35K, we went to the docs and we're like, hey, we got to raise kidney prices $5,000. And they went, so? I'm still going to take it. He's like, that's the CEO's problem. Because the way organ transplant work is Medicare or insurance companies will say, like hearts, we'll give you $300,000 for a heart transplant and that post-care, period. Figure it out. Pay it, procure it, do everything you need to do. That becomes a business problem. But from the doc perspective, they just want the material. They want those organs. So back to telling the story, it's the communication that matters. We're trying to close the gap between what they know or don't know and what we know. How many of you have done a presentation and the board asked no questions? Yep. That's a bad place to be. You usually want them asking questions, even if it's just what do you need from us? Because that's what you should be going in with, is always an ask. I always coach people. Go in with an ask. Go in with an ask. If we're not making it relevant to them, they won't ask questions. It'll glaze over and great, thanks for telling us. And what that says is they don't understand the personal risk to them. Yeah, we've got insurance, but defending those is not fun and it takes up too much time. Okay. So, information asymmetry is then exacerbated by something called affect, or the affect heuristic, which is an emotional response. I'm going to get to the good stuff. I'm giving you some of the why and the background, some of the psychology of all this. Hopefully, this is good. Whenever we hear about anything, there's some level of emotional response. Now, the better understanding we have of it, the better, or the less of the emotional response. Okay, if I started talking about 4th of July and fireworks and hanging out with the kids and the family, it's probably a generally positive emotional response to that. But if we start talking about the current state of the market and our 401ks or 403bs, people are probably initially going somewhat negative or pessimistic because it's like, damn, I'm down $50,000 in the first quarter because the market just tanked. Luckily, it's just all a paper loss. But everything has an emotional response. Now, there's been a lot of research in the cyberspace, and what has been found is that when we mention cyber, it's a very personal connection. There's a deep psychological impact to people because they can feel that. They think it's going to happen. Now, an interesting study in 2018 was that most organizations, and I think it was nearly 1,900 were surveyed, said, yes, cyber attack is very likely. And then on the flip side, they said, like 40% were like, but not us, we're not a target. It's like, what? It's like a similar study that Dell did in 2015 where the CEOs were surveyed and they're like, yes, the CIO is definitely a good option for the CEO for the next round. And like it was like 75% of CEOs said that the CIO should be the next CEO because we're all data companies, we're technology, there's always that element. And they're like, cool. What about your CIO? And they're like, oh, no. Like 50% of them are like, it's going to be the CIO, but just not my CIO, which I thought was really interesting. It's like, you think they should be, but not your guy? That means that's on you. You should be prepping them to move up. So the idea that it's the same line of thinking. Executives think, oh, yeah, cyber attack, that's a real thing, it's going to happen, but not to us. What? You are clearly not understanding what's going on here. So another issue with effective response is there tends to be a large focus because of this emotional response on the symptoms. So if we have a phishing attack and someone clicks on it, it's like, you need to train them. Instant knee-jerk reaction, not looking at the deeper level of how did it even get in there, defense in depth type of thing. What's going on the front end that the malicious message got through. There's the retraining aspect, but then there's the what, nothing stopped it on the way out? You didn't inspect anything? Like, come on. So, before I get to the really cool thing. So yeah, systemic approaches are really what's needed to reduce the cyber, the information asymmetry gap and reduce the effective heuristic. When we work together, we make better decisions. And so there's researchers that developed a game. And the website is decision-disruptions.org. And it's decisions and disruptions. And it's Lego-based with cards. They have a whole GitHub site with all of the things to play this game. And what they found was that executives, regardless of your level or background, people fared similarly. Now, the CISOs, in fairness, did a lot better than the executives, but they all eventually failed. The best results is when everyone worked together. When the groups were individualized, they went with what they knew, which wasn't the whole picture. The CISOs knew the technology, and they focused more on that. The board focused on the keywords and terms that they knew, and so when they were spending money to put in measures to do things, they went with that. And it was when they worked together that they did better, and they found that through this game. So there's that. All right. Okay. Now, I said cyber is a personal and psychological thing. There's other research that found as soon as people, especially not us, because we just live it, but lay people and especially board members, as soon as they hear cyber, they go negative and they start shutting down. So we have to get them over that. And that's where the personal connections come in. That's where the discussions come in. And that's where we have to start building trust. And trust is one of the key functions of getting through this. Like, how many of you think your board trusts you? All right. Yeah, but you're new still. So the trust equation looks like this. You have credibility, so that's what you know. And hopefully they've hired you because they think you know something. Then there's reliability of being able to deliver on what you know and what you do. And then intimacy, which is closeness. Simon Sinek, will say this, I'll trust you with my life, but would I trust you with my wife type of thing? It's that piece. But the denominator is the biggest driver of the whole thing. It's self-orientation. If you go to the board and you're like, I need this, I, it's going to bring down that trust factor because the entire focus is on you. If we turn that, and so now that denominator's getting larger, and if we remember our third grade math, if the denominator gets big, the trust gets small. But if we can turn that into a nearly zero, and it's about the company, it's about the organization, it's about the risk to the board, we are in this together, it shifts, and the denominator gets very small. And what happens when you divide by a very small number? The t gets very, very big, right? When you divide by 0 or nearly 0, it explodes. And that's the whole point. And I think a lot of people make that mistake, is that it's self-oriented. We even see this in conversations. Someone will say, oh yeah, example, someone walks in with a boot on their foot, and it's like, oh man, you broke your leg, or your ankle. Like, Fred, what happened to your ankle? And you're like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh yeah, and then there was this time where I broke my ankle too, and it's like you just shifted it around from him to me. And that's like, I can see Fred now. It's like, Ed's a jerk, He doesn't care about my ankle. He wants to share his story. Instead, it's, Fred, what happened to your ankle? Okay, nice story. That happened to me too. How are you recovering? I know what that's like. What are you doing? Do you get the support? What help do you need? And now it's shifted back around. Like, I can relate. Let's turn it back to you. And that changes the entire dynamic. And now there's this trust of like, wow, man, this person cares. They're involved. All right, now the funniest line in my research. I love this part. So we talked about speaking the language of the business. We want to reduce the information asymmetry gap. We want to reduce the effect heuristic. We want to speak the language of the business. And I kid you not, someone actually wrote this down, and they said, MBAs tend to do better at this. Whatever the hell that means. That's still my favorite line of the whole thing, because there's a duh factor in there, where it's like, well, you should, I would hope, at that point. All right, so let's talk about the research. The research question roughly was, do aggregated risk metrics work better than tactical metrics when it comes to risk perception? Because like I said before, when I was telling the story of how I got here, was presenting tactically wasn't working, so I found this aggregated CIA method, and they tended to respond. And so it's like, is that universally true? Is that the case? And so did a bunch of math, and we said we had to research or survey 180 people. So we did 90 CISOs and 90 executives or board directors. And then executives were C-suite and above or board members, self-identified. We did a 90% threshold and an alpha of 0.05. Here's my plug for anyone doing surveys for researchers. Answer all the damn questions, please. I had 280 responses, and I could only use 201. It would have been cool to have better data. But like someone would answer questions, you'd be like, cool, 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 cool. Damn it, you missed one. And you can't make questions required in academic research. So I ended up with 93 execs and 108 CISOs. Cool. All right, a little background of some of the results for demographics. The original intent was to do CISOs in the Chicago area, because that's where I'm from, and I thought, man, there's 160 CISOs or so in my group, and I have a lot of followers on LinkedIn. I should be able to do this, and I got like 60. So I had to expand it. My chair was cool with that. And so that one was the Chicago people, and this is the where'd it go? It died. The big bar is the somewhere else. We asked questions about the industries to make sure it wasn't biased, I guess. The three big ones are finance, healthcare, and information. Information's kind of vague because some people are in finance or healthcare and they still recognize themselves as IT people first. Try and get that working again. There we go. So then we asked about company size. The blue bars are 100 to 1,000. Orange was less than 100, and gray is more than 1,000. So a decent mix for board members or CISO types. Lots of dudes in this industry. Who knew, right? Go figure. Actually, this ratio is better than the industry. There's a lot less women in the industry. So, similarly at board of director and executive level. So, Sharon, I thought that was interesting. Didn't impact anything. So, you're not meant to read this. This is just, these are the tactical metrics that we presented. And what you have, though, is you have, damn, my pointer stopped working. Hang on. Business continuity. No? Really? There we go. 1. We have the result, which is what the measure is, some scoring on a 3-point scale, and then a evaluation of risk and effort. It was all explained what the ranges of all these things were. This is, by the way, there's a whole section in the dissertation that says this is not a qual versus quant thing. If you want to have that debate, let's talk afterwards. So this is what they got to see. And then this was the aggregated one. And again, this was explained. So we gave an overall score, an average risk rating, and then the score for 6 aggregated values. So that's what was evaluated. So let me just ask this group, which ones do you like better? You may have actually done the survey. Did you do it? So which one do you think fared better? That is very tactical, which some people took like 3 minutes and some people took like an hour because I think they actually read through all of them. It was funny to watch some of these timers. That or they went to lunch. I like the idea of they read through it. All right, so votes for, I like this one. Cool. Votes for, I like this one. Wow.
I understand your question, just which one's better?
Which one do you think had better results for risk perception? Like, oh, this elucid.
Somebody observing this, not the person asking.
Yeah, I'm just asking you guys.
Yeah. Well, this is simpler.
That's simpler. Guess what? CISOs didn't care. Which, on reflection, so that's chapter 5, right? When you reflect on your study, that actually makes sense. The CISO should be able to look at the tactical stuff and come to the similar conclusion of the business-related metrics. They're like exactly the same, which is wild. And so the study was like a before and after. It was like, look at these and answer these 13 questions. Okay, now look at this and answer the same 13 questions and evaluate risk perception. So here's for the nerd people. So the CISOs were normally distributed. Did a t-test, negative 0.102 with a p-value of 0.919, which means there's no difference. Couldn't have, they're almost exactly overlaid on each other. High R coefficient, 0.869, strongly correlated. How do you think the execs fared? I thought they were going to be like the business. That was the null hypothesis. No, it was exactly the same. The execs, not normal, which we knew. So I had to do a different study, Wilson sign rank test. Again, the p-value 0.837. You didn't even have to do the calculation. You can see that the lines are on top of each other. In some places, you can't even see the blue line. So the conclusion of this whole thing was that the tool that you use for the presentation doesn't matter. You can use aggregated risk metrics. You could show them tactical stuff. And we talk about this in some of our CISO dinner groups and breakfast meetings is how do you present risk to to your execs? And people are like, I do these top 5 and I hit the flavor of the day and I do this. Great. And then people will critique it and be like, oh, it's garbage. And this is why you're having a problem. Nope. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's the story that you tell. It's how you connect it back to them. You answer the question, what's in it for me? Your message is the driver. It has to be in business terms. Business terms, maybe finance, but it's probably the business that you're in. Kids educated, availability of systems if you're in that environment, impact to patients, donors, whatever the business that you're in. Yes, you can relate it all back to finance, but you don't need to if you resonate better with that. I recently made an argument for something at Gift of Hope. We were going to invest like $120,000 in some technology. And I did the whole ROI calculation, positive net present value, payback period, soft savings on jobs, reallocating of resources. And And the CFO was like, that was a great argument. But you sent it to the CEO and didn't tell him how the impact of donation. How many donors are we going to gain from this? What is going to be the improvements on donors? He's like, this makes sense to me, but he wants it in donors. I was like, damn it. That's the MBA, DBA in me that like just went fine. Like this, to me, it was a financial decision, not necessarily a donation impacting one, because I didn't see a direct relevance. But CFO was like, it got approved, because the CEO can at least read finance stuff. But he's like, it would have been a stronger argument if you had the donor information in there too. Trust is a common language. Build trust. Trust is going to get you a lot further. So have lunch with your people and find the champions. There's usually one or two people in a, is this the hook? Oh. There's one or two people that care about what you're doing, especially once you bring them the care mark and stone stuff, they will probably care a little bit more. You might get at least one presentation here. Remove the focus from yourself. Talk about them. Find out what they care about. And focus on the message. It's the message. It's not the numbers. There's some references. Those are the key ones. There's like 150 in the actual dissertation. If you want to read it, there it is. There's a short link. That's how to contact me. Questions? Yeah.
Did you break down types of messaging or by type of executive?
So it was
metrics to your COO, financial metrics to your CFO. Like, does that resonate better than you have metrics based off of individuals on the board?
Yeah. So when during the study there was an explainer sheet of what each of those were. I don't have insight into how they interpreted that, but when we talked about the M value or the money one, it's like this relates to potential direct financial loss to your organization. Therefore, that's what this means. So it probably resonated somewhat with a financial person. We also explained that each of these scores were out of 100. So you've only got 50 points out of 100 on that. You have some risk in that space, and what each of those meant. But the survey did not fully answer what you were, there was no message with it. It was, the design was, can it stand on its own? And it did, because it fared the exact same as the other one. And so to make any movement versus one or the other is the messaging. And that was actually called out as a further research topic and option. Great question. Thanks, Fred. Other questions from those who have to present? Baffled. Messaging is the key. No? All right. Cool. I'll stick around if you want to chat. Thanks, guys.
Funny. The next talk next door here is board level and executive reporting. And it's more about the new SEC guidelines will affect us, but
Yeah. Yeah, you have to know about it. The SEC is going to make you know it exists and do something about it.
yeah, no,
Not you.
I know about the guidelines, but I'm just saying that like the talk is a little bit about is like overlapping with your topic. I guess it's ironic that how to report this. It's kind of like two topics, but the overall topic is how to report.
Yeah, you see this at conferences now though. It's become more and more prevalent of how do you present and how do you do this stuff, because one, you have to, and people are asking for it finally.